Alrighty, I feel like I started almost every single time that way.
Well, yeah, because you hit the record button.
I do, and
so
then
you know
that's like your way.
It's my cue to know that we're recording.
But today we are talking about traction. Yeah. I don't know,
that was very lackluster there.
I feel like if I talk about more, like I might be giving everything away, but we'll talk about like the cons, the pros, our experiences. What else are we talking about?
We're going to talk about some contraindication, some precautions, nice little reminders, real life versus book.
Oh, yeah.
And then an ethical question and some questions at the end.
So let's go ahead and stretch into it.
I mean, I'll take it.
The PTA Podcast with your hosts, Ken
and Laura. Thanks again for joining for another exciting episode. All right. So let's tug into the new...
Or pull.
Is it tug or pull?
I mean, it could be both.
Isn't technically a tug just a pull?
I mean, kind of.
But that's not what...
Wow, you're still struggling.
Still carrying it over, but that's not what we're here to discuss today. Today, like we talked about, we are going to talk about traction, and we're just going to kind of talk about it as a whole versus breaking it. We're not going to break it down too much, not that I know of, into like lumbar versus cervical versus...
I think because the goals are all relatively the same.
Yeah. And I think when people think of traction, they think of literally traction machines. But you think about, we can do manual tractions on so many different body parts, actually. In a weird way, you think about joint mobs is kind of sometimes a way of doing traction.
I mean, yeah, a little distraction in there, kind of pulling a little bit.
Exactly. Anything with distractions, kind of a little bit of traction. So they go hand in hand.
So, do you have any like crazy experiences with traction?
I've had patients freak out on traction machines.
Like having anxiety panic attack status?
Kind of, yeah. So, definitely one of the biggest things I would say is when doing traction, whether it is their first time or they have been a long traction goer, make sure the bell's always within reach, because there might be that one time where they freak out, and if the bell's not in reach, it can cause a little bit of hysteria. I have personally never done that. I've seen someone else do it, and that kind of caused, a patient panicking in the room and pretty much screaming for help. So I've witnessed it within our clinic, but I've never been the one to do it. But the patient I had, it was first time on traction. We set her up. We let her know what's going to go on. This one was intermittent. So it would pull, release, pull, release. It was not a static traction machine. She was set up. Everything was fine. Stayed with her for a couple of the, going on and off. Everything seemed fine. And then all of a sudden, the pressure from the strap just started bothering her really bad. And so all of a sudden I hear ding, 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 like literally like 1,000 times it felt like. And of course I race over there, turn it off immediately, and then ask her what's wrong. And she goes, I just felt like I started suffocating just because of the pressure on my head from the actual strap was just starting to bother her. And then she started freaking out and overthinking things. So it wasn't even anything actually physically being done. It was a lot of the mental kind of running away with it and that kind of stuff. And I would say that's probably one of the most common things I've seen when people start to freak out on or over traction, is a lot of it's just like, it's not actually anything physically being done. Like there's no pain physically being done or anything like that. They just start to get in their own head and they start to think about like your neck being tugged on. And we're always told, our neck is so precious and that kind of stuff. People just start to freak out a little bit. And then I think they think of the old day of traction where people are put on stretchers and stretched till they dislocate.
And get taller. That's what I always tell patients. I'm like, we're about to make you a little taller.
Yeah.
That's what we're going to do.
I've said the same thing.
I don't think I've had any, crazy ones. I think people just don't find it comfortable. Especially like the lumbar traction, they feel like they can't really breathe, but unfortunately it has to be at least somewhat tight so it can get a good grip. Other than that, I feel like it's, some people like it, some people don't. And we've had some clinicians and some PTs, they would traction everybody. You have back pain,
you get
traction.
The traction machine.
You have neck pain,
traction.
traction. Like it was always like a go-to. But then again, like we use eStim as a go-to, so it's like like how much more is one beneficial than the other?
Well, I think it depends on the patient.
True. I feel like it depends on their symptoms, depends on how they're presenting. Then it kind of points you in the direction. But I've had PTs that's like every single patient was traction to the point where they had to order more traction units because they kept running out of traction, or they had to like super plan accordingly because they just couldn't accommodate for everybody having traction at the same exact time. And
that's insane.
Most clinics I've worked with, I think there's only been one clinic I've been at that all of them were like the pneumatic pump tractions. So you would have to go in, get them set up, and then you can take it with you. And I think only one was the actual table, and that's the one I used at school, which when I first saw it, I was like, oh, this is mind-blowing. I just set you up and press a button. Cool.
Yeah. Well, but then you have to definitely make sure you're doing math calculations correctly and everything like that if you're doing it. Luckily, I've always been in clinics where the PT assesses that and puts down what range they find appropriate, which is really nice. Now, I will say, like, when I was doing my clinical rotation, which had the intermittent one, they were really good at positioning the traction machine at the, like, different angles. Because you know how, like, if you have let me see if I can get this correct. If you have a 45-degree angle, you're more targeting like the lower vertebrae. You're getting
super specific.
Yeah, but like I think if it's your angle's larger, it's the lower vertebrae you're getting. If your angle's smaller, it's the higher vertebrae.
That's what I would have said.
I think that's it. I'm like,
but you're pulling out actual degrees and everything.
Well, 45 is just one I can think of. I was just giving an example, but I don't know if 45 is actually it. But
sounds like a lot.
That's why I'm just saying I'm just pulling out a degree.
That sounds like a lot.
But like they would actually make sure to, based off of what they felt, like to make sure that head was positioned within that region. Now, the clinic that I spent most of my time with, it was just set them up on cervical traction. It's pretty much, the degree doesn't change.
Yeah, it's just that
one.
And
it's just at the one. And then you kind of just go from there. That was pretty much it and everything like that. So, like, do you feel like traction is beneficial if you don't take that step, or do you feel like it would be more beneficial and people should take that step?
Like, should find out like what angle toward? I feel like if you have the ability to change the angle, I think you should do it.
Yeah,
because you can kind of like get an idea of where the radiant pain's coming from. If it's C6, C7, so on and so forth, then kind of adjust the angle to target the segments that you want. Yeah, but I don't think totally it's like not beneficial anymore if you can't change it. It's like, oh, you're C6. Oh, my cervical traction unit can only target upper cervical, so I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
I don't think it should be like that extreme.
Yeah, and I definitely think there's a benefit for doing traction for even those above and below. Like we've always talked about, you always want to work the joint above and the joint below also of wherever the injury is going on too. So even if it, like, say it's C5, like, you want to work C6 and you want to work C4. Like, you provide the traction within those regions, too.
What would you say to a patient that came up to you and said, oh, I want to do traction at home? Like, how would you approach that? Say that there is traction part of their plan of care. They're doing it at the office. And they're like, oh, is there a way I can replicate this at home? Do you have ways to replicate both lumbar and cervical?
Yeah. There are definitely machines that you can do that are over the doorway that are considered safe as long as proper training. You can also do have you ever seen the inversion tables in a way? Mm-hmm. They kind of provide a self-traction against gravity too that way. That's kind of a little bit more of a everything one. Just depends on like what they can handle also at the same time. My recommendation is always like we had a preferred traction machine that if patient wanted that, we'd recommend one. But if they ever were like, well, I already bought one, I'd always recommend bringing it in and let's go over it and make sure that they're educated properly on it and can properly perform it correctly to make sure that they're safe. Now, if I think they can't perform it correctly, my recommendation is not going to be using it at home. If that makes sense.
No, it does.
So.
As far as, where was I going with this? Oh, manual traction.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have ways of performing lumbar manual traction or cervical traction?
Lumbar, not really. Like, it's just too much body weight for me to kind of hold and pull. Again, that's just more me. Like, I guess you can kind of tug on both feet, but I don't feel like I can get, depending on it, I don't feel like most of their clinics was set up where I could get enough actual tug for it to be beneficial, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Cervical all the time. I did it all the time, and oh my gosh, I swear patients loved it.
Because I feel like you can't judge the pressure when you do it manually. Like when it comes to like the machines and you have the pneumatic pump, like you can see the pound pressure that you're using or the settings that you're putting it under. But when you do manual, like it's just light, moderate, heavy at that point.
Yeah, it is definitely like, but you go based off your foot, like you're holding them. You can literally feel their neck, and you can feel as you start to pull, if things start to relax and release a little bit more, if things start to tighten up, like you can adjust, I feel like at the time, more of what you need. And then most of the time when I do manual traction, it's not a static. It's intermittent because that's just a lot for you to kind of hold on to. Like you, of course, you don't want to pull with your forearms or with your shoulder. Like you want to kind of lean back and let your body do the work for you. But you know, it still sometimes can put you in an uncomfortable position. Definitely if you don't have like, you know, low high tables and your feet are kind of already hanging off and you're then leaning back. And so like, it just depends on how long you kind of hold it. So like mine were usually intermittent. Plus we also had a static traction machine. So I'm like, well, if I might just do static, I'm going to put them on the traction machine.
Do you do manual if someone's already done static?
I might add it in at just the very end of like doing some soft tissue work, because usually if they're already doing static, I'm not going to make my whole treatment plan around doing more traction.
Yeah.
I'm going to probably be either doing joint mobs or I'm going to be doing soft tissue work. Most likely is what it came down to. And so like I might add it in, definitely if I know the person prefers, like really enjoys the traction, might give it a little tug, but nothing, like I'm not going to spend long at it. It might be literally one little nice little tug at the end. And usually I would say the only people I would really do traction on is if traction, they couldn't tolerate the amount of traction that was kind of required for the machine, because you do have to pump it up to a certain point for it to stay. Like you can't just do like 1 or 2 pounds and it stay there. Like it just, the air decreases and it's out and you're not even tugging. So like if they couldn't tolerate, if it was too much, like if they had other reasons, like the band was too much on their head or something like that, then I would do manual traction with them along with probably some joint mobs and do like a split treatment, half and half, or just depends on what they're saying for the day. For the lumbar, like I said, usually that's always a machine. I do some hip distractions and kind of traction there. Definitely if they had signs of radiating pain. But other than that, lower extremity, like I do ankle distractions too. Like again, they kind of go into that joint mob a little bit. So like they kind of go hand in hand. It just depends. But I didn't do them as often. Let me just put it that way. So
okay.
Yeah, I did do a lot of shoulder with impingements actually, because a lot of patients found relief with that.
Like a shoulder distraction.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha.
Yeah, a lot of patients found relief with it, so I definitely would do that. What about yourself?
For which one?
For both. Do you do lumbar? Well, let's start with that one because I clearly really don't. Do you do lumbar?
I have, traction? Yeah. So I usually either do that unilateral long axis mob of their hip to kind of get the traction in there.
But do you feel like you're doing traction of the lumbar at that point?
So what I'll do for the lumbars, if I can just do lumbar straight, I'll prop them up into a Swiss ball. So they're supine, kind of hip flexion 90, knee flexion about 90, and then I'll prop a Swiss ball underneath their feet, grab onto both their feet, and just lean back.
Yeah.
Have you done that?
Yeah, that's what I was referring to, but I just...
So I've done that one fairly often.
That
I feel like I've gotten pretty good results from it.
I feel like I don't have enough, grip strength.
You don't really need grip. You just put your hands on top of their feet. You're not really pulling them. You're literally just kind of placing your hands on top and leaning back.
Well, I haven't done it with the Swiss ball, so that would be an interesting concept.
That might be why.
Yeah.
I don't think you've done it the way I'm talking about.
No. I haven't done it the way you're talking about.
Yeah, it's super simple.
I was about to say, do you just
traction.
lay hand on top of hand and then just kind of pull back from their toes?
Kind of, yeah.
In their way?
Or you can just do like the one hand on one foot, one hand on the other foot, and you just lean back.
Yeah.
It's really easy, and it's just a light distraction at the back. Again, it's for people like can't really tolerate a full lumbar traction, but still find some relief from getting a little bit of a tug. I feel like that one's been fairly beneficial. And then I think for me personally, what I've struggled with is just trying to find hand placement for cervical traction. So I've done like the tips of my fingers kind of where their subox is. I've done kind of like the side of my index fingers underneath their the cranium. I'm just trying to find like the right spot. I did like palms underneath or behind like their ears. I usually experiment and see what feels better in the moment.
Yeah, I usually do the index under their suboccipital, the cranium, and then I kind of come up with my thumb tucked up like around kind of their mastoid area. And then it kind of like, it's just like a cupping technique in a way. Like,
yeah,
you just kind of cup it there, and now you've got full control of.
So I feel like I don't have like one for sure way I always do it.
Yeah.
I feel like everybody's always different.
Well, and each person's head is different. Like, you get some that are ginormous, and you're like, how is my hands going to reach all this?
Yeah. And
then you get others, you're like, I can't fit both hands, but I need both hands.
Right.
Like,
I'm like overlapping my hands.
Yeah. So definitely you do have to kind of move things around a little bit, but like, maybe now I'm thinking, yeah, no, it's kind of there, but like the rest of my hand is like palming their head.
And then I feel like for at home, they have that over the door cervical. They have like a static cervical like wedge they can just lay on. I've never tried either of them, so if any patient kind of asks, then I'm like, okay, well, I know there's options out there, but again, for safety, I don't really recommend you using it.
Yeah.
Unless they do bring it in, we can go over it, kind of discuss it, and see how it works. For lumbar, if they can tolerate like a dead hang from like a pull-up bar or some sort of lat machine, and just kind of hang, like gravity do the pull instead of an inversion table, because sometimes those aren't very comfortable.
Yeah, and you have to be able to get on and off those.
And then a corner at a counter, kind of do like a dip, hands down, just kind of prop yourself up, I think is another way. But again, those are two ways that require significant
I was about to say the
upper body strength to be able to do those.
The tough one with those is usually most people who are coming in just can't tolerate that.
Yeah. Besides those, at home lumbar traction, I feel like it's just too difficult.
Yeah.
Because even for someone like an inversion table, I don't really recommend that at all. Because then you run into issues like, okay, well, like blood pressure.
Well, yeah,
or like heart disease. Like there's too much when it comes to an inversion table that it's never really my personal recommendation off the bat.
I think for me it just depends on the person. Like, I've had people who've been doing it for years, and they'd be like, do you still? And I'm like, yeah, let's go for it. It's not, by no means do I usually recommend that just off the top of my head. They're usually bringing things up. But, like, I myself, like, if you have a younger person kind of my age, you know, I'm not young, but I'm not old. I could still get on and off. I'd be like, yeah, sure. It's not going to, you've got no history of anything else. Give it a shot. If anything, you know, start off with just a couple minutes. Start off with that 5 to 10 minutes. Make sure that you're not getting too dizzy afterwards. Sit down. You know, there's just things to talk through. I would definitely say, like, sometimes in this role, it gets nerve-wracking to suggest at-home techniques because you don't want to be held, like, liable in a way.
Yeah.
And there's a fine line of, like, give it a shot, but at the same time, don't overdo it. So, Curious, can you name some of the contraindications for traction?
Contraindications?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I feel like I know, like, precautions, like osteoporosis precaution.
No, that's a precaution, not contraindication.
That's not a contraindication.
Contraindication is a hard A.
Fusions?
Nope.
Fusion's not a contraindication.
Nope.
I'm not doing it on someone who's had a fusion. I'm going to break their brace.
It depends on where the fusion is. It's pretty much what it comes down to. That's why, like,
If
I
you
hate
have
that one
but you
because
saying
it's
like,
trick.
oh, I'm going to do cervical traction.
Exactly.
Because you have a lumbar
so
fusion.
they won't label it as a contraindication because it all depends on the location of the fusion. So they're saying if you have a cervical fusion, you can do lumbar traction. If you have a cervical lumbar fusion, you can do cervical traction. So they put that in the precautions because it's not a hard stop when you hear it, and it also depends on the locations. However, though, I will never do traction on someone who had a cervical fusion. I will never do cervical traction.
I mean, that's what I think of when I think of contraindication.
Yeah, but contraindication is more
pregnancy?
like no matter what. No.
What the heck?
That is not one.
Anything involving heart disease.
No. So, you ready for this?
Go for
I
it.
brought out my handy trusty book just to make sure I got them all correct. Contraindications are where motion is contraindicated. I loved that one. That one made me laugh.
You did this on purpose.
So pretty much the fusion. That one I'll give you
What
two.
about fracture?
Acute injury or inflammation.
I feel like people do it all the time when there's acute injury and inflammation, but go ahead.
Yeah. So I think the theory of acute injury or inflammation is more of like you can aggravate it more than,
And that's a contraindication, not a precaution.
According to the book, yes, I know.
This is the difference between book and real life.
Exactly. Joint hypermobility or instability. That one would make sense because it's not really going to hold it in place, and they're usually more mobile anyway. So the last thing you want to do is, pop anything out of place. So this goes for traction. This is not for just cervical or lumbar. Like this is also for, other traction, like shoulder, ankle. So think of it that way. Then also peripheralization. I can't talk today. Of symptoms with traction. I had to laugh because that one means you go on the traction first and then you find that out. So pretty much your peripheral nerve gets worse while on traction. But in order to find out,
to realize that's happening,
you have to be on the traction. Again, guys, this is where it's funny to listen to book versus actual clinical. And then uncontrolled hypertension.
I did say heart disease.
Well, this is clarifying it a little bit more, okay?
Wow. I didn't know you get so nitpicky there.
Well, because that one's the one. So precautions are structural diseases or conditions affecting the spine. So osteoporosis,
Gotcha.
arthritis, all that good stuff. You can just be aware of it. When pressure of the belt may be too hazardous. So pregnancy would actually be a precaution because for lumbar, for example, because of where the belt is located.
Correct.
Yep. Disannual fragment. Displaced annular fragment.
I don't even know what you're saying right now.
Displaced annual fragment. So I'm assuming a fracture. Medial disc
Moving
protrusion. So medial disc protrusion. When severe pain fully resolves with traction. I thought that one was a little interesting.
There's a precaution when it's actually resolved.
Mm-hmm. When severe pain is resolved with traction.
Well, yeah, I'd be worried too.
Yeah, because I'd be
like,
first of all,
I think I just legit made it worse.
Yeah.
Considering you were in severe pain and it just went away just like that.
Claustrophobia.
They're gonna think I'm a miracle worker.
Yep, or physical aversions to traction, like we talked about. Instability to tolerate prone or supine positions. Again, these are all precautions, guys. Disorientation. TMJ. This one is actually a very good one to bring up because of the fact where most traction machines lie, that can irritate.
On their TMJ.
Yep, that can irritate their TMJ. So be aware of that. As someone who personally suffers from that, I can tell you can do cervical traction, but like I'll tell you I get a headache afterwards because my jaw is sore like later down the line that day because of the pressure. However, sometimes it feels better to do that and have a headache than deal with cervical pain. So just something to keep in mind. Dentures. That is a precaution.
All right.
Now, how would you say those precautions and contraindications compare to actual?
I feel like for the most part, at least in my setting, it's mainly, does it come down to, do you have a fusion? No? Okay. All right, let's see how this goes.
Yeah. I
don't really think we go through all of those as much, at least clinically wise.
Yeah, I don't, for us, to me, those are things to be aware of if you think traction would be a good benefit to be just on the lookout. But most of the time, definitely if they're starting their treatment that way, the PT's already gone over the contraindications and precautions. And if there's one that kind of is iffy to you, that means he's already deemed it, he feels comfortable with it. Ultimately, it's his plan of care and his license. So I'll perform it. Now, if I notice something, I'm definitely going to go and discuss it with my PT if they're not getting better. I've literally had patients who come in and they do traction and they're like, this literally doesn't feel any different, doesn't feel like they feel no benefit out of it. And I've gone to my PT and say, hey, can we switch over to heat and stem? I feel like the patient would be more beneficial. They continue to complain more of soft tissue issues. Can we do this? And luckily I work with great PTs and they've been like, sure, no problem. But I back it up. I back it up with why I want to discontinue and what I want to replace it with reasons why I believe so. Versus just coming in and being like, patient doesn't like it.
Yeah, because I feel like a lot of times, if the patient's not finding benefit, they're not going to come back.
Mm-hmm.
If they feel like, oh, I'm just going there, they're going to do traction, it doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
They're going to do some mobs, it doesn't do anything. And then I do exercises that brings me pain. They're not finding benefit. And I feel like even if that is their program and it is what's going to benefit, you just have to communicate with the patient and let them know what's going on and what we're looking for. That way they can start finding those things. And otherwise, they're not going to come in.
Yeah.
And they're not going to really review us very well.
They're not going to find it beneficial. You have to remember, people value their time. And if they feel like their time is being wasted, they're not going to put the effort in and they're not going to be satisfied. So as long as they feel like their time is beneficial, whether sometimes it's a placebo effect or not, then you know what? That's what matters sometimes.
All right, you ready for my story time? Wrap this up.
Go for it.
Well, it's not a story time. It's a ethical what would you do question.
Okay.
You ready? All right.
52.
Every time. So here's the background story. There's a PTA and 3 PTs. The PTs are usually always there. It's 8 to 5, but the morning patient at 8 o'clock canceled. So the PTs decided not to come in until 9 a.m. And the PTA was there alone in the morning, 8 o'clock.
Okay.
So she hears the door ring and she heads over. Oh, this story is by the APTA, by the way. It's actually on their website. It's posted if you want to read it.
Okay.
But I'm just going to kind of cliff note it so we can get through it. So the door rings. The PTA goes and answers the door. And lo and behold, it's a doctor. It's a surgeon that sends the patients over. So the PTA looks at the doctor and says, good morning. It looks like someone tweaked something. And he says, you've got that right. I got a neck strain from tennis. And I just need a quick little fix. A little cervical traction should do it. So at this point, what would you do?
Technically, I cannot treat him. He's not been evalved.
So, okay. So
I call up the PT.
You would try to call the PT.
I call the PT and be like, hey, what's going on? Now
Say they don't answer right away.
There is weird workarounds where he can set himself up on the traction and I'm not held liable. He can use our gym facility if you'd like. It's a weird situation, but ultimately I would not feel comfortable with it.
Okay.
Because of the fact that He has not been eval'd. It literally comes down to he's not been eval'd. He's not a patient. He's come during work hours. It's my license at that point.
Okay, so let's progress the story a little bit. So the doctor just lets himself in. He goes, "Which room do you want me in?" And the PTA tells him that, well, I don't have any PTs here. They don't come in until 9 o'clock. That's why our sign says we're closed till 9 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
And the doctor at this point gets annoyed and responds, "No offense, but what part?" I missed that. I already skipped it. The doctor has a surgery at 9 a.m. He has to attend.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to be doing the surgery, obviously. So he's just looking for a quick little traction and then go back to the surgery room at 9 o'clock. But the PTs don't get there till 9 o'clock. So he gets annoyed, says, "No offense, but what part of surgery at 9 a.m. did you not hear?" So the PTA tells him, "Sorry, but we can't provide cervical traction without a PT being here."
Mm-hmm.
So the doctor says, "Well, why not? Why can't you do it? It's not hard to just strap up the machine. And I'm sure you've seen it before." And the doctor says, "I can help you walk through it as long as you just hook me up because I just can't get to it." And at this point, the PTA just says, "I know how it's done. I know what to do. It's a matter of you need to be evaluated."
Yep.
That an evaluation isn't within our scope of practice, so we can't do it. And we can't just automatically set someone up on mechanical traction without being directed to do so. So here the doctor gets mad, saying that they'll direct him. They'll do it themselves. They just can't get themselves into it. And this is where the problem lies because the doctor is a major referral source. So you piss off this doc, you're losing business. So do you still not do it?
It's your license.
At this point, she tries to call the doc, but it's just not happening. And even if she did call she tries to call the PT. Even if she did get a hold of the PT, apparently the PT can't get there until half an hour later. So he's not going to be there until about 8:30, 8:45, and the doc has a surgery at 9.
Nowadays we have this cool thing called telehealth.
True, this was done in 2018.
Yeah, so now, honestly, you want my honest opinion. I would not be doing it until he was evaluated by a PT and been cleared by a PT to do it. My recommendation would, if it's such a big referral source, then the PT needs to be on site or they need to do a telehealth visit. And at that point, once I get the all clear from the PT to treat after an eval has been done and performed, then I will treat. But until then, that's my license. If someone was to come into the clinic from the APTA or the Nevada State Board and say, "Hey, I want to see this patient's file. You're doing traction on him." I can't produce that because there is none. I'm in trouble. No one else is in trouble. I'm in trouble. That goes my license for any clinic I want to work at anymore. That's your career on the line. I don't care how much that doctor's a referral. Now, the owner and the PT might have a difference, but I'm sure they can smooth that over because just like the doctor's held to certain standards of what they can and cannot do, we are also held to different standards of what we can and cannot do within our scope of practice.
Okay, that's it. That pretty much finished the story. At the end of the day,
Yourself?
she really didn't do it. Same. I don't think it's worth it. I get it, and after that, I'm sure things are going to be very awkward.
Mm-hmm.
Whether with the dog, because even if you did do the telehealth, right? They did the PT thing, they were talking, they said, "Okay, cool, we'll do traction, blah, blah, blah." And then I set him up on traction. The whole thing is just going to be awkward.
It's just awkward, no matter what.
Because then he's like,
"So
why can't you do this to begin with, blah, blah, blah." I'm like, because I can't make that decision to start. Whether I know what it does, I know how it can benefit you, all the symptoms you're presenting with, I believe that's what could help you. I can't decide to do that. Mm-hmm. It has to be the PT. I have to be directed to do that.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think.
Well, and the thing is too, is honestly, if someone doesn't respect your scope of practice, you have a whole nother issue on their ethics in a way. I start questioning his ethics if he does not respect my scope of practice and what we're ethically bound by too.
And I feel like if it ends up with a dip in referrals from that doc, then your hands are tied. There's nothing you can do.
Mm-hmm. That's where it's the job of the owner and the PT to smooth it over. That's why they get paid, or clinical director, or whoever it is. It's their job to smooth it out. Their job to protect you, but also, smooth things over the doctor at the same time. Like, that's their problem, not your problem.
Oh, well, that's all I had.
Yeah. No. Favorite traction, real quick?
Favorite traction?
Mm-hmm.
Cervical.
Not because it's easier to set up.
Because it's easier to set up. Yeah. I don't have to worry about it as much.
I knew it. That's his whole technician side coming out. I'm not going to lie. Like, dude, if I didn't have to get that traction machine out, I was happy. It was so much easier. One more quick question. What's your thoughts on technicians setting up patients on traction?
I don't think they should.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, at that point, like technicians, it's like we're there to support the PT. Mm-hmm. The technicians are there to support both of us. But I feel like when it comes to directly working with patients and not being able to assess situations like that, I don't really think they shouldn't really be involved.
No, I agree. I think if there's training eventually more on technicians, then yeah. I know there's a certificate, and then maybe, you can do that kind of stuff. I know. But there's other courses.
We can have a whole episode.
There's a whole,
to just technicians.
I was about to say I was gonna wrap it up anyways, because that was my next comment. Was there's so much we could dive into that. But thanks again for listening. We really appreciate every single one of you guys. And if you guys missed the APTA social, don't worry, it's up on their YouTube channel. Don't forget to check out our YouTube page also, where we do some reviews of products, talk about some of our experiences, and a lot more content to come. Anything else to add?
No, you wrapped it up pretty well. Anyways, follow us on our socials, mainly Instagram. It's where we're the most active. Post questions, we'll ask questions, participate, just let us know what you think. And until then, we'll catch you in the next one.
All right, bye.
Take care.
The information in this video or podcast is not intended nor implied to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. All content, including text, graphics, images, and information contained in this video or podcast is for general information purposes only and does not replace your professors or a consultation from your own doctor or healthcare professional.